All right, let's get to our next discussion. Being a leader may not be all flowers and roses, especially in the political scape and space. Hadiza Bala Usman, a former managing director of the Nigerian Ports Authority, has opened up on the major issues that happened while being a leader in that company. The 200-page book explains some of the most important events that define her 5-year leadership in that agency. The book is titled Stepping on Toes, My Odyssey at the Nigerian Ports Authority. Now, aside this major accomplishment, she has recently been appointed as the special advisor to the president on policy coordination, which will play a crucial role in providing strategic guidance and support to the president on culture, entertainment, economy, and National Assembly matters to the progress and growth of the nation. So joining us in the studio is the author herself and also the special advisor to the President Tinubu on policy coordination, Hadiza Bala Usman. It's nice to have you join us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
I can just imagine your portfolio now. It's like you're the entire coordinator of the economy and the entire space. It's really nice, really nice.
It's policy coordination, so
yes.
Just to make sure that all our policies are in sync.
Are in sync.
Yes, so that we're not, different policies are not contradicting and conflicting themselves. We feel that this is an important part of governance that needs to be prioritized so that we're all speaking the same language.
Okay.
Right. And how much of an eye-opener, or what are you bringing to bear from your past experiences to run this latest appointment?
Oh, it's actually very important. Having been a part of governance across both subnational and federal government, it gives me this experience to understand the critical need for synergy, the critical need for having policies speak together, because sometimes an agency in another side will be pushing or implementing a policy that conflicts with another policy, and that provides a sort of disconnect. Okay. And will not be in the larger interest of the country.
Okay. Now, you're here in the capacity of an author, so
yes.
let's leave your portfolio for now. But you have a book here, Stepping on Toes, by Odyssey at the Nigerian Ports Authority. That is a story a lot of Nigerians would like to hear. I have the book here, meanwhile, so courtesy of the author herself. But why did you write this book at this time? And I understand the book came out in April.
Yes.
You know, talk to us. Why did you decide to come up with the book like this?
I felt it was important to document my experience. I felt that there's a need for the larger public, the larger space to understand what it is like to be occupy a role in a very high agency in Nigeria, the challenges that exist, and indeed my journey going to Nigerian Ports Authority and while I was there. Some of the attendant issues and challenges that were applicable to my tenure was what I wanted for the public to understand. And indeed, as I mentioned, even getting to the position, it was important for people to understand, because when I was appointed, people thought I was too young, I'm female, I'm from the north, I will not be able to sort of get on that position and drive the reforms needed. So I felt it was imperative for me to document that.
Yeah, amazing.
And in terms of the significant impact of your service at the NPA, a portion of that was reflected in your book, Stepping on Toes, My Odyssey at the NPA.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. Over the 5 years or so that you used there. Of course, there were challenges, there were controversies, yes. But people have spoken, people are speaking about, how you turn things around. From your own, assessment now, yes. What do you think would be the major achievements?
I think one of the major achievements is transparency and accountability. Some of these sectors are very opaque hitherto. There's a lot of mystery around the governance process within the Ports Authority, within the maritime sector. And I felt it was important to demystify governance and shed a light so that people actually understand what it is that went on. So I felt I brought in accountability, I brought in transparency, and more so, when I was there, I encountered a lot of, I would say, unconventional contractual relationships that the government had with certain private sector companies, and also lack of compliance to contractual obligations. And that lack of compliance, as I say, is on both sides. In certain instances, government themselves, we sometimes don't even comply to our own contractual obligations, and then the private companies too. So it was more to ensure such compliance, to ensure delivery on obligations, to shed a light on accountability and transparency across the value chain of the authority.
All right, you took on some companies that some people see as really powerful in the private sector. Companies like Intel's, company like BUA, companies like Ladol, and all of that. You took on them one way or the other. Now, share with us some of the experiences you had and whether you achieved the purpose to which you took on them.
Well, to a certain extent, I achieved that, as I mentioned, is shedding a light on it. So on the one side, decisions were taken where some of them were actually reversed by the president. But for me, it was, while I am in this seat, this is what I believe is in the best interest of Nigeria, and I implemented it. To the extent that someone else feels otherwise, i.e. the minister of the president, they can revert it. But these are the facts, and Nigerians are seeing the fact that these companies did not do well for Nigeria, and based on that, that is why I took certain actions. And indeed, the book was also to address some false narratives that companies push out. So a lot of companies and individuals that have vested interests push out false narrative about what transpired about their relationship with the authority. And particular such instances that I mentioned, I felt it was important to shed light on them. And indeed, there are quite a number of other issues that I didn't put in here, but I felt these are, I'll say, very topical, that needed clarification, needed the larger Nigerian space and indeed the international community to understand what it was, what relationships they had with the government through the Nigerian Ports Authority, and what obligations they didn't deliver, and what the challenges were that existed. So I feel, however it ended, the fact that we have called them out, that's another thing. When you call people out, you call companies out, that in the longer term would address and reduce people going into such funny contractual relationships or giving out such conflicting directives that do not achieve what is in the best interest of the country and the best interest of our economy.
And taking on big players as Intel's, the BUA and Ladles, the Ladles of this world, also kind of, brought confrontations between you and the then minister. And you've also spoken about that. People are also, people that have an opportunity to read the book are also talking about, what Madam Hadiza had to say about, would I say your boss at the time. But let's if you have to clarify, just, explain to us. Some are saying you said in the book that it was a matter of favors because that was the point where you were even suspended. But help us, paint the real picture of, what you were trying, the point you were trying to prove, and the issue with the minister at the time.
It was some of the details that I provided in the book as related to my suspension was the procedure with which I was suspended, was that the right process, and the allegations that were made around the basis for which I was suspended were not validated after the 8th month of investigation. There's a panel that was constituted. It was constituted by the minister to investigate in totality everything that was done during my tenure. A public notice was issued inviting Nigerians to submit memorandums on areas that they felt we had erred. But fundamentally, the thrust of the allegation was the non-remittance of 165 billion. I was alleged not to have remitted that amount to the coffers of the government. And after investigation, it was determined that during the period of investigation, we actually remitted 192 billion, which is even more than what was expected. But importantly, which is what I keep referencing in the discourse, is that this amount of money, it sits with the central bank. It's not even in the private bank. It's nowhere. So every revenue attributable to an agency of government like Nigerian Ports is collected to central bank, and central bank holds the so-called 165 billion. So to the extent that there's any act of non-remittance, there's no issue of financial benefit accrued to anyone. So this money is not sitting in a commercial bank where someone is making benefit from it. So the idea that you're creating an allegation around something that there's no instance of fraud in itself is funny. So that whole money has always been in central bank. So even if there's an issue of remittance, it's CBN moving it from account A, NPA, to account B, Ministry of Finance. So nobody is making benefit from that so-called non-remittance. But even be that as it may, there was nothing determined. It was determined that actually I remitted more than there was. So it was clear within the narrative and the book for you to understand some of the bases with which the suspension was done. An allegation was made clearly that was not the reason. It was more to get you out of that place for me to do what I wanted. And I think I've explained some of the conflicting directives that were giving, some of the considerations and concerns that were obtainable, where we have a contract that expired and the minister is saying, oh, reinstate an expired contract without going through a due process. And we felt that transparency and accountability requires for the Nigerian Ports Authority to go through a public tender process to engage a contractor, as opposed to having served the government from 1997 to 2020. You are now giving a unilateral extension without another tender process. We felt that was out of line. In the same instance, another service provider had also had a contract for, I think, about 10 years, and the contract expired. We initiated a tender process and were directed to cancel it and extend it. So these are some of the, I would say, conflicting positions that my person as managing director was opposed to, and the minister at that time had a different perspective. He felt these contracts should just be extended without going through a tender process. And a tender process allows for government to get value for money, allows the larger, I would say, Nigerian private sector to bid and participate in the tender process, as opposed to allowing one company to keep doing a contract without subjecting it to due process for this length of time. So you have a contractor from 1997 to 2020. And when the contract expires in 2020, you are now saying, oh, extend their contract without it being subjected to tender process. And you also have the same instance where a contract expires and the minister says you terminated it. Like, no, there's no such termination. It actually
had
ended by execution of
Exactly.
time. So
based on the initial contract.
Yeah, it expired. So we didn't terminate it. So there's some of those conflicts existed. And importantly, I felt that people coming to private sector, younger Nigerians, need to understand some of the dynamics that exist within that space and to prepare themselves and to know what it is that could happen and how to sort of understand what you need to do, how you need to navigate yourself when you occupy such offices.
I recall that a book was also written by former Minister of Finance Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, where she said fighting corruption is dangerous. I read that book, and he also gave insight into some of these things. I believe books like this need to come out so that Nigerians can, those who want to go into those spaces, will begin to walk their minds, preparing their minds that you're going to have opposition, but if someone like this could scale through, then you too can. But in all of this, what was the president's language? Well, how did he intervene, or was he aware, or was he not aware of some of these things?
Well, he was, as you know, he's like a due process person that feels that a procedure should be done. Just go ahead and do it. Go ahead and go through the investigation, and the panel should submit its report. And what is interesting is that the basis for the ministry never revealed the report. So they never gave me a copy. A copy of the final report was never circulated to members of the panel. Importantly, it was a list of allegations and queries that were arrived at after the 8-month investigation, which I have detailed in this book, were given to me, which did not have the core of the financial misappropriation that was given. Of course, there are a list of allegations around insubordination. I was said to have written to the president without going through the minister. I was said to have, so the whole list of alleged infractions are all in the book. And I believe these is meant, I wanted to go to the public so that the public can see what it is that happened. Indeed, the character assassinations that people seek to do, which is why I also wanted to write the book, so that my own story is provided. Any other person that has a different perspective.
Exactly. You come up with your perspective and your opinion.
You know, feel free to write your own book. Feel free to explain what happened. What is important is for you to provide factual narrative of what transpired, provide the attendant documentation that is needed. I here provided the reference documents and every other thing that is needed to understand what transpired. I believe, as you mentioned, Ngozi Okonjo's book, we should encourage people that go through public service to document their experience. And I think some of this documentation would also help to reduce impunity from incoming people that are going into positions of influence. So when you are at the crux of sort of wielding that so-called power and then giving directives that are contrary to enabling legislations, you remember that that person would write a book about you. And that would, I think, hopefully temper some of these acts of impunity, some of these acts of, oh, I am all superpower minister, I can do what I want. When you remember that what you do would actually be out in the public, and I feel people should be held accountable for their actions. What you do and the letters you write when you're in office, you should be ready for those letters and those actions to be discussed in the public domain. What do you have to hide? Why don't you want Hadiza to write a book? Why are you criticizing me for saying what exists, what transpired? I think these are the things that are important, and I believe books like this would discourage this act of impunity that you see people get into when they get into public office. It will also encourage others to document their experience to ensure that they work within the guidelines, and I think the
confines of prescribed standards and so on.
And
now, okay,
right?
Yeah. Before your question, the point there is that a new government has come on board, which you are part of.
Yes.
And as it is, within the first maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yes.
There's a lot of reaction already, even from around the world. People are like, oh, wow, Nigeria is becoming a good destination again, and so on. We're seeing, the IMF, the president is currently in France. We're hearing what investors and private sector companies...
There's a buzz in Nigeria.
The buzz, exactly. As it is, what should Nigerians expect more? You were part of... Not just the government now. You were part of the system that brought this government to play. So you are involved in understanding what outsiders may not even understand when it comes to the vision and what the government stands to achieve.
Yeah, there's a lot we should expect from this regime. As you mentioned, I was a core part of the team that worked on the campaign, and some of the things that we spoke about is the fact that we'll hit the ground running, reforms will be done immediately. There are clear attendant things that are needed to revive the economy, which are the things that are being done. Of course, they will pinch Nigerians. It may be uncomfortable, but this is the reality of where we find ourselves, and we need to sort of pull up our boots and understand some of the attendant challenges that we need to rip up the bandage and move on and get things done. So you Nigerians should expect a lot of dynamism. A lot of you would have engaged with President Bola Tinubu while he was the governor of Lagos State, and following that, so he's someone that is keen to drive an economy that would provide the necessary enabling environment for Nigeria to prosper. And I think we should expect a lot of that. There would be dynamism. There will be what is needed to address some of these challenges with quick turnaround time and rapid response to issues.
Right. I was also looking forward to you talking about the lessons you garnered, in your last public service appointment running the NPA, and I see that you devoted a chapter in your book towards the last. But I think it's also instructive for Nigerians and the world, indeed, to hear how what you are taking away with you, especially as you also have another national assignment that you are involved with. What would be your key takeaways now in terms of the lessons you learned running the NPA?
Yeah, it was a huge learning curve, a lot of experience and learning. I learned to understand the level of how corruption fights back.
Of course.
So that's like a real life, to also understand how to navigate your way in public service, in political appointment, how to prioritize your work, prioritize your battles and choosing your battles, and understanding what is worth doing, what are the areas you feel are important and priority, how to balance your conflict areas, I would say, meaning which battles to pick and when, and how to also preserve yourself as an individual that would not remain in office forever, how to understand that who you are, your sense of self should not be attributable to the office you occupy. Public offices come and go. They should not define you. You should identify your own personality, your own sense of who you are should be driven around yourself, because the office would go. Some of the privileges that exist within the corridors of power are very temporary. So realize that this is not for you to own and for it to define you, but for you to pass through it. So I think these are some of the things that I've seen people battle with, and these are some of the things that I insulated myself from, ensuring that I remain who I am. I remain understanding that it's just a job. It's going to go. Yes. And my sense of self is not tied to that job. Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Now, when it comes to ports, of course, not so many Nigerians, it's not like going to the shelf to buy bread and coming back. The business of the port is not very open and known to a lot of Nigerians. But some people felt that with the way, how lucrative it is and how Lagos was choked up, that there should be opportunity for other ports across the country, like the Calabar, like the Bayelsa, Rivers, Delta, and and so on. And it's a good thing that there's a new deep sea port now in Lagos as well. But Nigerians are looking for new ports to spring up that way.
Yes, and there's a port coming up also within the shortest period within the south area around Akwa Ibom. Yes, so there is a Ibom deep sea port which should come up. There's also another Bonny deep sea port which would also come up. But importantly, the destination of cargo is determined by the consignees, and people look to see where their cargo would end up to determine where they're taking it. Where is the easier location to final destination of my cargo? So people would choose Lagos because there's a huge corridor of the industrial belt around Ogun State and Lagos, where some of the items that are imported or the raw materials imported end up. So where are my goods going to finally end will determine the port that I use. And also, how easy is it for my cargo to navigate from, for example, on airport to reach, whether it's Kaduna, whether it's the southeast area, do articulate. I remember while as Nigerian Ports Authority, we made quite an issue in engaging the Minister of Works on prioritizing the road corridors that are linked to the ports in terms of rehabilitating them. We felt those are priority areas. This is some of the policy synergies that we'll do enhanced now in this government. So the roads that would be given priority considerations are roads that have economic value. So for example, there's a road from Onesi Port, which exits to the southeast. That's a very important economic road. So you just don't pick a road that is going from nowhere, is leading to nowhere. You have to pick roads that have economic benefits. Or a road that's
going to my village.
I know. So some of us politicians tend to do that. We pick roads that are going to our village or our wife's village.
Exactly.
As opposed to prioritizing economic roads that have economic benefits. So these are the things we did. And Minister of Works, based on that synergy, they were able to rehabilitate the Ecom Bridge in Cross River, Calabar. Now it is a larger bridge, so you can now move articulated trucks with containers from Calabar Port to the northeast part of the country. So hitherto, when you come to Calabar Port with a container, you want to go to Adamawa, which is, like Calabar is so close to the northeast and the north central, and it's a huge hub for moving cargo. But there's no linkage. The bridge, you can't pass through the bridge with a container. So these are some of the things that would challenge people in choosing which port to use. They'll quickly come to Lagos because there's clarity on how I would move. We tried to, while I was there, we reduced the tariff for vessels calling in the southern ports so that we can have more activities in that area. But what we need to do is enhance those interconnection to hinterland, enhance interconnection of ports to commercial hubs and the hinterland, and that would sort of open up the other port locations for enhanced activities.
All right.
Right, and talking about the ports, that question is has also been reverberating across Nigerians in those areas, saying why Lagos? Why can't we? Let's open up those areas. And I don't know whether it sits among your, would I call it regrets? If one asks now that after serving at the NPA, if you could quantify, regrets, unfinished business that you hope perhaps you could, if you had more time, you would have wanted to see, to actualize, what would that be for you?
Some of the things I would have liked to see is, as you mentioned, sort of diversify cargo to other locations, but ensure that we have intermodal transportation for cargo evacuation, because some of the congestion you reference are a function of all the cargo that comes to Nigeria is moved on the road. So if you measure the tonnage and the TEUs of those cargo and you translate, all those are on the road. So the road will definitely spoil and to be congested. So we need to now ensure we have rail, a portion of the cargo go on rail, a portion of the cargo go use internal waterways. This is another area that we need to enhance, utilization of inland waterways, where we move cargo through our internal inland waterways to transport them and move less. So the understanding
that also mean dredging some of the
and
rivers
using flat bottom vessels, because they're vessels that do not need their barges. So they're barges that don't need that depth of draft to enable them move. So opening up that area for government to understand that it's not about fixing the roads or expanding the roads. It's more about having intermodal transportation system for cargo.
Okay. Well, before we go, where can one get these books? Stepping on Toes.
Yes, in bookstores in Lagos, Abuja, literally Akwa Ibom, Benin. You have them in Roving Heights. You have them in Latana. We have them in quite a huge number. But so it's, you can hashtag, I think is at Stepping on Stores on Instagram.
All right.
Stepping on Stores on Twitter. You see the list of bookstores.
Amazing.
We ran out, so we're having them delivered in the bookstores today and tomorrow.
So you have to keep printing again and again and again.
So please get a copy. It makes interesting reading. It's a light read.
I have a copy now. I have a copy here now. So, but this is interesting. Right. I must thank you, Hadiza Bala Usman, Special Advisor to the President on Policy Coordination.
That's still a new title I'm not used to.
You will get used to it.
You will surely
you'll get used to it. By the time the policies begin to come, and then from different sectors, and you have to melt it down into what you give as priority to the president, you will see that you're in already. But it's something you've been doing all the while.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you for having me.
Well,
thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thanks for documenting this as well, because young people who want to go into politics, who want to serve, will need some of these books and tips from here to help navigate.
Yes.